Welcome everyone to yet another talk organized by Istanbul and Music Studies program of the Istanbul Research Institute. Today, our guest speaker is the curator of the recently launched online exhibition Echoes of an Empire, Antonios Botonakis. Merve Özkılıç is also with us today and is going to moderate Q&A session. Before introducing them to you, let me briefly cover how the program will proceed today. You may deliver your questions through the panel on the right during the talk. Once Antonio's presentation is over, Merve will be selecting and relating your questions to Antonios. You may continue writing your questions during the Q&A session as well. So let me briefly tell you about Antonios and Merve. Antonios Botonakis is a postdoc fellow at Koç University Stavros Niarchos Foundation Center for Late Antique and Byzantine Studies, GABAM. Since 2018, he has been carrying out the Byzantine Musical Instrument Research Project organized by GABAM and the Friends of Music Society in Athens. As a result of this project, Echoes of an Empire online exhibition came into being, and today's talk will be on that. And Merve Özkılıç is a graduate student at Istanbul Technical University and a member of GABAM. She is the content editor of the Echoes of an Empire exhibition and participated in the project very closely and during the whole process. So I'm leaving the floor to Antonios right now. Antonio and Merve, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Amir, for the invitation. Thank you very much for arranging tonight's chamber talk. Even though these online lectures are something completely new, it's really nice to have such an audience attending, interested in the Byzantine history and musicology in general. Before I begin my talk, I would like to express my gratitude to the two institutes that provided me with the opportunity to work as a postdoc researcher on the scientific project titled Byzantine Musical Instruments. Those are Koç University Stavros Niarchos Foundation Center for Late Antique and Byzantine Studies, GABAM, and especially the director, Dr. Engin Akürek, for his support. But also, I would like to thank the Friends of Music Society of Athens and the director, Dr. Alexandros Charkiolakis. I would also like to thank Dr. Nikos Maliaras, who acted as the scientific advisor to the project, as well as my colleagues from the Suna Kirac Library, where the online database is hosted, and my associate, Merve Özkılıç, who has been the content editor of the database, the accompanying texts, the Europeana exhibition, titled Echoes of an Empire, and the text of the talk that you will hear tonight. I feel the need to also thank the Rectorate and the Dean of the Hellenic Mediterranean University, and also the Department of Music Technology and Acoustics, who provided me with the permission to work on this project. In closing, I would like to thank you once again, Amir, for organizing tonight's talk, and the Istanbul Research Institute for the honor of inviting me to talk about the musical instruments that were present in Byzantium. Music has always been a primal need for humans because it is one of the best ways to express emotions. Wandering through the numerous artifacts that chronologically belong to the Byzantine period, such as caskets, frescoes, icons, miniatures, and luxurious objects, an ambitious researcher will come across with several depictions illustrating music ensembles and musical instruments that serve as a way to emphasize and celebrate daily life events taking place in both in imperial and rural environment. On the first image on the left of your slide, you can see King David playing a rectangular psaltery. The second image depicts the wise men in front of the king of Media, Kyros. The king is surrounded by two trumpeters and an armed guard. The two trumpeters are holding long, conical in shape trumpets that are depicted gold in color, implying that they could be made out of bronze or gold. On the third image, on the far right of your slide, you can see a detail from the nativity composition showing a shepherd playing an avlos. Trying to reconstruct the music background under which secular music played a vital role in the life of the Byzantines, one will surely face the problem of why this kind of music was not preserved, contrary to the religious chant of the Eastern Orthodox Church that is still in existence to this day. For several reasons that are not relevant to this talk, secular music was surely evident in the Byzantine Empire, but because it had no connection to the religious service, it did not have the chance of being notated, thus surviving. It was merely transmitted, maintained, and evolved through oral tradition. The only aspect of secular music which can be examined to a certain point is probably the ceremonial music in the Byzantine court. Many historical treatises describe thoroughly the practices that took place both in the palace and outside of it, like the Book of Ceremonies, written in the middle 10th century. The author of the ceremonial treatise was Constantine Porphyrogenitos VII, who lived from 905 to 959. Constantine, son of Emperor Leo VI and Zoe Carbonopsina, ruled Constantinople in the time period between 913 to 959, a period of 46 years. Constantine was attributed the epithet Porphyrogenitos, suggesting the purple chamber of the imperial palace that was decorated with porphyry, where children of reigning emperors were usually born. Constantine was afraid that the knowledge on imperial ceremonies would become faded and could vanish in the future. This fear of oblivion drove him to compose this ceremonial book after collecting numerous records of customs and practices, both ancestral and current, thus compiling a detailed list of ceremonies which he presented in a simple language, both for his own use and for future generations. In this slide, you can see a detail from an ivory plaque that depicts Constantine being blessed as an emperor by Christ. The artifact, dated to the 10th century, is preserved in the Pushkin Museum in Moscow. The musical instrument that is mostly referred to by Porphyrogenitos is the Byzantine pipe organ, an instrument deriving from the ancient hydravlis that was invented in the 3rd century BC by Ctesibius of Alexandria. Hydravlis utilizes air, which is located inside the reservoir. As the air is pushed inside the reservoir with specific hand pumps, it pressurizes and letting air blow through the pipes. The reservoir is open on the bottom and inserted into a cistern of water, which stabilizes the air pressure and let it out through the pipes. On the right part of the slide, you can see a detail from a late 2nd century mosaic depicting two musicians, one playing the hydravlis and one holding a cornu, a large metal horn of ancient Rome that had the shape of the letter G. On the bottom left part, you can observe a marble stele known as Sikilos column that features poetry and musical notation. The tombstone that preserves the oldest surviving complete musical composition has been dated between the 1st and the 2nd century AD and was discovered in Trales near present-day Aydin by Sir William Ramsay in 1883. The lyrics say, "While you live, shine, feel no sorrow. Life is short and times demands the end." The video that you are about to see demonstrates a performance of the Hydraulis playing the song that is based on the Sikilos column. Contrary to the Hydraulis, the Byzantine pipe organ neither used water nor it was controlled by a hydraulic pressure mechanism. This type of instrument featured an elaborate mechanism that used two large bellows to produce air and send it to the pipes. Often, larger in size pipe organs used a third bellow in order to stabilize the air pressure. The bellows could be separated from the organ when a relocation at a close distance was needed, and the air was sent through a long tube. The organist used a sophisticated technique to create sound by sliding handles instead of pressing keys on a keyboard like we do today. And there are depictions like this one that make us think that perhaps a foot keyboard was also used, though this can't be verified. On this image, we can observe the Ark of Covenant, King David on the left, playing a bowed string instrument, and some musicians on the right part playing a double-sided membrane drum with a stick and a pair of cymbals. What is important to notice is the figure on the upper right part that plays the pipe organ. Two figures can be seen next to him on the right, standing on large bellows and providing the instrument with air. The posture of the person who is playing the pipe organ is rather uncanny, which led many researchers to believe that perhaps there is a foot keyboard as well. Constantine informs us that the Byzantine pipe organ sounded during the reception by the emperor of the faction of the circus, known as Deximon. Excuse me 1 minute. This reception, called Deximon, was held within the palace grounds. The author also describes in detail the reception of the Gold Hippodrome Festival on the Monday after Adipascha, that is, the Sunday after Easter Sunday. This reception was held at 2 different places inside the palace, each designated for each deme that featured a fountain. According to the historical text, after the first deme acclaimed the emperor, crying out the holy, Agios in Greek, together with the organ sounding in the fountain court, the prepositos, who was the supervisor of the palace and the Supreme Court official eunuch in the imperial service, would receive a sign from the emperor, and the organ would stop playing. The deme would continue with the acclamations, and once stopped, the organ would sound again. When the organ would cease playing, the deme would start singing a musical composition known as apelatikos, which was probably some kind of hymn or chant. Upon completing, the organ would be heard again. Then the first deme would start chanting hymns of 4 lines, known as tetralekta, followed by the recite of imperial eulogies and chant. When the chant was completed and the emperor would stand up, then the organ would immediately sound again. The same procedure would repeat for the acclamations from the second deme too. Especially in winter, or when natural phenomena such as winds occurred, the deximon would take place in the private court of the Trikonch that had a gilded roof. The mystic fountain of the Trikonch, that was in fact a system of 3 fountains and a basin within the Sigma portico, was mostly associated with the reign of Theophilos, who ruled the Byzantine Empire from 829 to 842. Theophilos is depicted in our slide accompanied by his court on the left part. This miniature is preserved inside the chronography of John Skylizis, a manuscript that was written between 1126 to 1150, kept today at the National Library of Spain. At the center of the Sigma courtyard stood a gilded pine cone fountain in a bronze basin with a silver-rimmed rim. On the long side of the Sigma, probably at either end of the portico, 2 bronze water spouts in the forms of lions were located, which gushed with water that filled the hollow space of the Sigma. During the Deximon, while the factions would praise the emperor, the central fountain would flow with wine, and the basin would be filled with pistachios, almonds, and pine nuts for the refreshment of the dancer and the musicians. At this place, the deme of the blues would present the emperor with the usual acclamations. Once finished, the organ would sound. After that, the apelatikos would begin, followed by the chant. Following the chant, the prepositos would stand down with the officials that had positions of command, known as great domestici. The faction of the Greens would repeat the same acclamations in the exact same order. Then the emperor would stand up, accompanied by the sound of the organs, and while standing at the throne, he would sign the prepositos, who would notify the cubicularios, that is the eunuch chamberlain of the imperial palace, that the organs should stop playing. The organ was also present during chariot races. The organ accompanied the acclamations of the Krakte, that is, the heralds of the factions, playing the thrice holy, in Greek, Trisagios Hymnos. The organ would perform later again, playing a melody with the character singing in the music scale of plagal mode fourth. This musical composition was performed when the emperor would go up to the kathisma, that is the imperial lodge, located at the eastern end of the track inside the hippodrome, which is highlighted at the map positioned at the right part of the slide. The imperial organ would also be heard right before the beginning of a special chariot race for the inauguration of the city of Constantinople on May the 11th, and in acclamation for the greeting of the Demarch, that is the president of the Dems, on the third day of Galilee, the Tuesday after Easter Sunday. Concerning the custom of imperial wedding ceremonies, one must firstly observe the ritual known as nymphagogion. During that ceremony, that took place the night before the wedding, the soon-to-be acclaimed Augusta, which is a synonym for the title of the empress, would descend the stairs of her establishment and would be greeted by the sound of stringed instruments, cymbals, and organs. Once she would be on horseback to leave her house, she would then wait for the acclamations by the two deans. However, what is not thoroughly explained is if the stringed instruments, the cymbals, and the organs performed as a music ensemble. Most probably, the organs were used to perform a small introductory musical phrase before the beginning of the acclamation, just like in the case of the Deximon, the reception of the deans. The following day, the imperial wedding would take place. The organs sounded after the completion of the wedding ceremony upon the return of the couple to the palace. More specifically, when the newlyweds would appear at the gate of Consistorium, that is the Aula Regia, the deans who would wait for the couple there would acclaim the emperor and the empress by sounding both organs at the same time. The organs played together in order to emphasize the happiness for the imperial couple's wedding. In the miniature, I have chosen to share with you, a scene from the wedding feast of Alexander the Great and Princess Roxanne. As you can see, the couple is located in the middle of the miniature, and the musicians on the second row are playing from left to right a short-necked lute, an avlos, a pair of crotals, and a harp's harp. On the third day after the imperial wedding, a ceremony would be performed in honor of the empress during her procession to the bath. According to the Book of Ceremonies, 3 organs were present during this ritual. The first one was positioned near the pergola, which is an outdoor garden. The second one at the entrance to the stable, and the third one on the far side of the landing on the way down to the bath. Perhaps that last organ was no other than the imperial organ, but most likely introduced the acclamation of the deans who were also present and sounded together with their organs. Stringed instruments that were mentioned for the ritual of nymphagogion were also used at a dance that was held on the 9th day of the 12 days of Christmas, known as Gothic game. Porphyrogenitos informs us that dancers would be accompanied by musicians who performed on panduras, a stringed instrument that belongs in the class of long-necked lutes. On this illumination, we can see the marriage between Theophobos and the sister of Empress Theodora that took place between 833 and 837, but also a pandura player on the far left part of the slide, it's a vessel fragment from the 12th century that depicts a musician playing a long-necked lute. The Book of Ceremonies also describes in detail the ritual in presenting a foreign ambassador. The emperor would wait for his imperial guest to arrive, seated on Solomon's throne, inside the great triclinium of the Magnavra, where the organs and the musical automata were located. At this point, it must be explained what the term automata means. Automata refer to mechanical devices capable of producing sound, movement, or both. Mechanical devices operating through air pressure are known to exist since the Hellenistic period. Hero of Alexandria, who lived in the 1st century AD, a Greco-Egyptian mathematician and engineer, was known for his inventions, such as the wind-powered organ, which you can see at the right part of the slide. As the wind sets in motion the wheel with the attaching blades, a series of arms cause the attaching piston to move up and down, thus providing compressed air into the pipes through a set of tubes. In the 12th century, one will come across the figure of Al-Jazari, a Muslim mathematician, engineer, scholar, and inventor. Al-Jazari created and described 100 mechanical devices, along with instructions on how to construct them, on a book titled The Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices, that was compiled in 1206. On the left part of the slide, you can see a figure used at drinking parties, one of the hydraulic inventions of this great engineer. Unfortunately, in our case, the automata mentioned in the Book of Ceremonies were not discussed or described regarding to their construction or function, neither by Porphyrogenitos nor any other Byzantine writer. So, only assumptions and hypothetical reconstructions attempts can be made based on the technological status of the period. To return to the ritual in presenting a foreign ambassador, the author states that he would enter the great hall of the Magnavra, that is the ceremonial hall situated on the periphery of the great palace, escorted by an official. That official would either be the commander of the emperor's men, known as Katepano των Βασιλικών, or the high-ranking official responsible for the horses and the mules needed by the army and the court, referred to as komis του Stavlu, or the protostratora, the chief of the imperial group of provincials, officials, and subaltern officers. The interpreter would follow, accompanied by one of the closest advisors of the emperor, known as Logothetis του δρόμου, who would lead the way. Once the ambassador would enter, he would fall to the ground, making obeisance before the emperor, and the organs would sound. Once he would stand at a distance from the imperial throne, the organs would stop. According to the custom, when the logotheti would ask the customary questions of the legate, the ambassador, the automata, specifically the mechanized lions, would begin to roar, the beasts on the throne would stand upright on their bases, and the birds, positioned on the throne on special platforms that resembled to trees, would sing. In that time, the ambassador's gifts would be brought in by the leader of the notaries, known as Protonariatos του δρόμου. Following the presentations of the gifts, the organs and the musical automata would cease, resuming their usual position. The description of mechanized beasts and lions by Porphyrogenitos dates to the description of the original throne of Solomon in the Bible, First Book of Kings, chapter 10, lines 18 to 20. The text mentions, King Solomon also made a large ivory throne and overlaid it with fine gold. The throne had 6 steps and 2 lions standing beside the armrests. 12 lions were standing on 6 steps, one at each end. On the left part of the slide, you can see a painting by the English artist Sir Edward John Poynter, titled The Visit of Queen of Sheba to King Solomon, that illustrates how the throne of Solomon probably looked like. On the right part is a miniature from the 14th century manuscript, preserved at the library of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences in Budapest, that decorates the frontispiece to the Song of Songs manuscript. Here we can see King Solomon seated on his throne, surrounded by animals, and the Queen of Sheba wearing a crown in the upper left-hand section of the illumination. The Queen appears in the company of other zoomorphic figures, playing the avlos, the tambourine, and the bell. So, to conclude the description of this ritual, once the organs and the musical automata would stop, the foreign ambassador, when so bidden by the logothete του δρόμου, would withdraw from the imperial throne, and upon his departure, the lions, the beasts, the birds, and the organs would sound once again. They would all cease when the ambassador would go through the curtain of the great hall of the Magnavra towards the Chrysotryklinos, that is the domed octagon hall lit by 16 windows, located inside the great palace. The position of the Chrysotryklinos is marked on a sketch plan of upper and lower palace at the right part of your slide. Imperial banquets that included the participation of pipe organs were performed during religious celebrations, such as the Pentecost, the Epiphany, the Ascension Day, and the Easter Sunday. At imperial banquets, in honor of foreign visitors, we learn that the 2 gold imperial organs and the 2 silver organs of the deims were transferred at one of the antechambers of the Chrysotryklinos, known as Orologion, due to a sundial that was contained inside it. Porphyrogenitos describes in detail such a banquet in honor of the Muslims' ambassador from Tarsus. While the guests dined with their lures, 2 groups of church singers, one from the Church of Holy Apostles, in Greek Agia Apostoli, and one from the Agia Sophia, stood inside the hall, behind the curtains, and sang throughout the banquet songs in favor of the emperor, known as Vasilikia. They would only cease at the entry of the dishes, giving room for the organs to sound. Theatrical performances also took place during these banquets. As in the case of the Muslims' ambassadors, the same ritual is also repeated at a banquet in honor of Princess Olga of Russia. It is safe to consider that, except for a few examples, it was common practice for the Byzantine emperors to include during these banquets the music of pipe organs, chanting, and theatrical arts, referred to as thymelica, because it provided them with the opportunity to both entertain the imperial guests and amaze them at the same time by demonstrating wealth and power. Searching through the centuries in discovering the historical documentation related to ceremonies and other imperial practices, one will certainly come across with the work of Pseudo-Kodinos, known as Treatise on Offices. The treatise, compiled between 1347 and 1368, presents the hierarchy of titles and offices, a description of their costumes and functions, of the feasts celebrated at the court, and the ceremonies of coronations, as well as of promotion certain dignitaries. Researchers have attributed the treatise to Pseudokodinos, pseudo in Greek, meaning false, in an attempt to distinguish this author from the figure of George Kodinos, a person who perhaps lived in the 14th century. Additionally, it's worth mentioning that some scholars do consider that George Kodinos was indeed a fictional character, creation of the copyist Andreas Darmarios, who in 1588 identified him as the author of the ceremonial book. Pseudokodinos often refers in his treatise to a variety of musical instruments. A first reference is found on the description regarding the celebration of Christmas and Epiphany, when the emperor would perform what is described as prokypsis. The term prokypsis describes both an elevated wooden platform and the imperial ceremony performed on that structure. The emperor would mount the platform behind a closed curtain. Once appeared, the curtain would throw open, and the audience of the palace, which was assembled, sang acclamations and hymns. Prokypsis involved the participation of trumpeters, horn players, drummers, and flautists. However, there would be no sound if one of the family members of the emperor had passed away, participating that way in the emperor's sorrow. The group of musicians that participated in the prokypsis is described by the term pegniote, meaning those who perform music. The text referred to the drummers by the name of anakariste, musicians who play the nakers or kettle drums, to the musicians that play the horn by the term vikinatores, which derives from the Greek word vukinon, and the flautists as soruliste, a Greek term that describes the musical instruments of flute. This is the first time we encounter musical instruments that are not mentioned in the Book of Ceremonies by Porphyrogenitos, especially used in that matter. Besides the horn, the musical instrument of kettle drums refers to an egg-shaped single-membrane drum that derives from the Arabic word nakara. This type of instrument is evident on miniatures found in other manuscripts of the same period, such as in the manuscript preserved at the Hellenic Institute of Byzantine and Post-Byzantine Studies in Venice, number 5, dated to the 14th century. In the folio 29 recto, we can observe 5 trumpeters, 3 on the left and 2 on the right. On the right part, there are also 2 musicians, the first one playing the kettle drums with 2 sticks, and the second one performing on an avlos. On a different part of the treatise, we learn about the use of trumpets for military purposes. Pseudokodinos informs us, but not in detail, that the army was under the control of the emperor, and that the Megas Domestikos, the supreme military leader, who was second in command, would give the order for the trumpet to sound as a signal to move. At the time of the compilation of this treatise, the Megas Domestikos was attributed to John Cantacuzenios VI, who was the military leader between 1325 to 1347, and the emperor was Andronikos Palaiologos III, son of Michael Palaiologos IX and Rita of Armenia, who ruled Constantinople from 1328 to 1341. On the left part of the slide, we can observe the portrait of Andronikos Palaiologos III inside a manuscript that is preserved in the State Library of Gutenberg in Stuttgart. On the right part of the slide is the illumination of John Kantakouzenos VI, depicted both as an emperor and a monk. John Kantakouzenos VI became a Byzantine emperor in his own right from 1347 to 1354. When he was removed from power by his son Matthew Kantakouzenos and John Kantakouzenos V at the end of 1354, he retired to a monastery under the name of Ioasaf Christodoulos, where he spent the remainder of his life as a monk. Is it safe to say that musical instruments were played only as static performances, such as the prokypsis, or to declare the beginning of a military expedition? Pseudokodinos informs us that musical instruments accompanied ceremonial movement as well. The Kavalikevma was the custom that took place on Easter, during which the emperor would ride out on horseback throughout the city or outside the capital. According to the historical text, early in the morning, once the emperor would be on horseback, the drummers would strike the kettle drums. The trumpeters would likewise blow the trumpets, and the horn players would sound with their silver instruments. The reason behind the use of drums, horns, and trumpets was purely informative. The sound was the signal to the people that the emperor was nearby and that they could approach him for help. In this slide, we can see a miniature from the Barlaam and Ioasaf manuscript that shows the emperor on horseback, musicians playing trumpets, a musician playing the cymbals, a double-sided membrane drum, and you can see how the crowd is near the emperor. It must be noted here that the trumpets sounding during the Kavalikevma are described in the text to be different in shape compared to the ordinary trumpets. The shape of those trumpets is still unknown, but judging from the visual evidence gathered so far, we come across two different shapes of trumpets. The straight conical ones, mostly made out of copper or gold, like the ones you can see here at a scene titled as Naval Battle. The different type of trumpets, depicted as white, features a bubble in the middle of the instrument. The context demonstrates that the latter trumpets were most probably used to announce the presence of an emperor, as is evident in the photographic example. In this miniature, depicting the accession of Alexander the Great to the Egyptian throne of Nectanebo, a musician performs on that trumpet. Two more musicians are visible, one on the left part playing a navlos, and another one opposite of him playing a long-necked lute. On the next slide, we see that same type of instrument in both illuminations. On the right part, these trumpets announce the participation of Alexander the Great to an equestrian event. On the upper left part, we can see two musicians playing the type of trumpet known as medieval trumpet, which resembles to the one that we encounter in the illuminations from the Byzantine period. This type of instrument is referred to as bouzine in Western literature, and the name probably derived from the word boukina, the Roman military horn. Still, no solid evidence can determine to what kind of trumpet Pseudokodinos refers in his text. Ergo, we are confined in hypothetical thoughts concerning the shape of those aerophone instruments. Authors contemporary with Pseudokoudinos refer to the practice of musical instruments being played upon the arrival and departure of imperial family members. For instance, Nikephoros Grigoras, a Byzantine historian and theologian who lived in the mid-14th century, informs us that when the Ottoman ruler Orhan Gazi, husband of Theodora Cantacuzene, left Constantinople to return to Bithynia, the emperor arranged for cymbal and drum players to escort him on his journey. On another instance, Ibn Battuta, a Muslim, Berber Moroccan scholar and explorer, who also lived in the middle 14th century, describes in his work that kettle drums, trumpets, bangles, and instruments that resembles to the horn, and surnayat, similar to the zurna, accompanied the emperor's sisters in Constantinople in 1332. Upon arriving, the Byzantine emperor and empress rode out to welcome her, escorted by musicians who performed on drums, trumpets, and transverse flutes, and announced their approach. It is attested that musical instruments were also present during the departures of ecclesiastical delegations, like the celebration that took place upon the departure of the ecclesiastical representatives to attend the Council of Ferrara Florence between 1438 to 1439. Musical instruments are also present during the entrance of emperors to Constantinople, as for example, in the case of the triumphant entrance of Nikephoros Phokas, who ruled the city from 963 to 969. In the famous chronography by John Skylitzis, one reads, "There they brought Nikephoros on board and conveyed him to Evdomon, from where they and all the city population bore him in procession throughout the Golden Gate into the capital with cheering and applause, with trumpets and cymbals." The Evdomon was one of the most important coastal suburbs of Constantinople, known today as Bakırköy. It was traversed by the Via Egnatia, and it served as the starting point of depart for imperial triumphs towards the city. The Evdomon played an important role in imperial ceremonies, starting with Flavius Valens, who was proclaimed emperor there and ruled between 364 to 378. In Evdomon, many other historical figures were also proclaimed emperors, including Arcadius in 383, Theodosius II in 402, Marcian in 450, Leo I in 457, Zeno in 474, Basiliscus in 475, Maurice in 582, Phokas in 602, Leo III in 717, Leo V in 813, and Nikephoros Phokas in 963, who is depicted in the miniature as being greeted by a group of musicians. The group of musicians are playing trumpets, single membrane drum, and a triangular psaltery. It must be noted here that musical instruments were also used in performances that parodied the ecclesiastical and imperial ceremonials. An example of this practice is preserved in the 10th century life of Basil I in the Chronographia of Theophanes Continuatus and in the famous manuscript of Skylitzis. The text refers to the incident where Patriarch Ignatius was mocked by Grullos and his companions. Grullos, whose real name was Theophilos, was a eunuch that was falsely unclaimed as patriarch by the Emperor Michael III, and was accompanied by men that were designated as metropolitans. One day, these men came across Patriarch Ignatius during a public procession toward a church outside the city. Upon approaching, they began to mock Ignatius by dancing to the sound of kithara and performing insulting songs, the content of which remains unknown but is characterized as worthy of a brother by Theophanes Continuatus. A depiction of Fouroulos and his retinue is preserved inside the Madris Skylitsis manuscript, folio 78 verso. However, the manuscript painter depicts the group of men playing a short-necked lute, a flute, a pair of cymbals, and a triangular psaltery, contrary to the original text. Mikhail Psellos, an 11th century Byzantine historian and philosopher, mentions of another incident where choral dances were performed as an act of mockery. During the besiege of Constantinople by Leo Tornikios in 1047, Constantine IX became sick due to gout and faced extreme stomach pain. Because of his illness, the emperor could not walk properly or appear in public, giving his opponent the impression that he had passed away. To show that he was still alive, Constantine, escorted by his empress Zoe and her sister Theodora, appeared on a balcony located on one of the imperial apartments. Upon his appearance, the opposing rebels started calling him ruin of the city and degenerate seeker after unholy pleasures. Soon, the rebels dismounted from their horses and started dancing in front of the imperial triad, stamping on the ground with their feet in time to their music and dancing in triumph as an act of mockery. On this slide, you can observe the coronation of Constantine IX Monomachos and Zoe Porphyrogenita that took place on the 12th of June 1042. Constantine ruled Constantinople from 1042 to 1055, together with Zoe Porphyrogenita and her sister, Theodora III. That explains why the three of them appeared on the balcony that day during the besiege of Constantinople by Leo Tornikios in 1047, as we've mentioned earlier. In general, the mocking of imperial ceremonials and ecclesiastical customs consisted of recurring elements such as dances, songs of questionable context, and the use of musical instruments. That can satisfactorily explain why in the illustration of the mocking of Christ, these patterns are repeated. According to the Gospels, the mocking of Christ occurred in three stages: following his trial, after his condemnation by Pontius Pilate, and at the time of the crucifixion. What happened during these three stages is described in the Gospels of Mark, Luke, and Matthew. Artists who illustrated this unfortunate event depict Christ standing in the center, accompanied by suppressors who strike him with reeds, and dancers who perform in an inappropriate manner. The dancers in that thematic are depicted with long, floppy sleeves covering their head as they turn their back on Christ. For instance, we can observe the miniature on the left part of the slide at an illumination dated to the 11th century. In the middle 13th century and afterwards, the researcher will come across with depictions that also embody figures of musicians. at the artifact titled Crucifix with Stories of the Passion, that is dated between 1240 and 1270, you can see on the right part of the slide, on one of the small scenes surrounding the crucifix, a musician is portrayed, in the left part blowing a horn. This is the bearded person on the far left part of the slide who is looking upwards and plays the horn. In the 14th century, we encounter frescoes with similar thematic, like the ones preserved inside the Church of St. George near Kumanovo in North Macedonia and the Church of St. Nikolaos Orphanos in Thessaloniki. In the left part, we can see the fresco from the St. George Church. We can see on the top two musicians playing large horns that could possibly be made out of ivory. We can see on the left part, a musician hitting a double-sided membrane drum, a musician playing the avlos, and on the bottom we can see a musician playing the cymbals and three dancers. Two of them show the same long sleeves like we see in the previous slide. On the right part, we can see again an image from the Agios Nikolaos of Orphanos Church in Thessaloniki, where the horns are now depicted as trumpets. We can see the suppressors holding reeds on their hands, and we can see again the same instruments like the double-sided membrane drum and the cymbals. Once again, the dancers appear to have the big floppy sleeves, like on the previous illuminations. Similar to the imperial ceremonies and customs, we are informed via historical texts of what was happening outside the palace and what musical instruments were used in the everyday life of the Byzantine citizens. In the weddings, for instance, it was common practice that musicians would arrive at the bride's home and perform wedding songs. Songs that they would accompany with musical instruments right before the beginning of the ceremony. After the wedding, a celebration would take place, which involved dance and musicians who performed on avlos, kitharas, cymbals, crotals, and membrane drums. It was not uncommon for pantomimes and actors to perform theatrical performances during the wedding festivity, though short in duration. Such a celebration would normally last up to 7 days, even though in some occasions it is attested that this period would extend up to a month or even more. In general, the Byzantines used to accompany any joyful social festivity with music. During the symposiums, after the attendants would enjoy their meal, they would begin to perform songs of love or convivial context by the sound of avlos, the syrinx, and the kithara. These banquets also included dances where the most frequently used musical instruments were the crotals, the drums, and the cymbals, in order to create a regular rhythmic beat. Wealthy citizens often invited a larger group of musicians in order to create greater pleasure to the banqueteers. On the right part of the slide, you can see the scene where Alexander the Great participates in a festive celebration. On that part of the picture, we can observe a pair of cymbals, 2 horns, and a pair of kettle drums. On the left part is a scene that depicts a banquet. The 2 female figures perform on a double avlos, known as diavlos, and the oxyvaphone. That instrument is illustrated as a set of small bowl-shaped pots, usually made of metal, that, just like modern metallophones, are struck by a wooden mallet or stick. The Byzantines also amused themselves by attending social festivities, held mostly in the bigger cities of the empire. Hound dogs, monkeys, bears, giraffes, elephants, and other animals were often used as means of entertainment, where musicians were always present. Their music acted as a call for the citizens to approach and watch these spectacles. Also, it is known that at the Hippodrome, special performances took place between chariot races that aimed to the entertainment of the attendants. Fights between wild birds, demonstration of fast hounds, iconic war fights, theatrical performances and dances with musicians playing the ablos or the kithara were amongst the most frequently observed events. Accordingly, it was common practice for the Byzantines to perform dances during religious celebrations, once the ecclesiastical service would finish. In Prisis Islands, the young women would be given permission from the priests to dance after the celebration of Easter in the narthex of the church, accompanied by membrane drums and flutes. On other occasions, they would dance at public squares, at the markets, on the streets, at the theaters, and at the countryside fields, playing kithara, krotals, and avlos. On the left part of this slide, you can observe the depiction of a female dancer holding krotals, dated between the 13th to the 14th century. In the middle is a detail showing a figure dancing to the sound of a horn during the worship of the golden calf made by the Israelites when Moses went up to Mount Sinai to receive the Ten Commandments. On the far upper part, we can depict Miriam's dance, sister or Aaron and Moses, that expresses her joy by dancing after crossing the Red Sea. She is seen at the middle, holding possibly a pair of castanets or krotals. The rest of the women are also playing from left to right order a transverse flute, a double-sided membrane drum with a stick, a pair of cymbals, and a bowed string instrument. Apart from those musical instruments, the psaltery, the double avlos, the bagpipe, the transverse flute, the cymbals, the sistrum, the krotals, and the membrane drum were also in use. The illuminations on the middle and on the left part of the slide also depict Miriam's dance, with slight alterations compared to the previous slide. In both examples, the female figures are playing a double-sided membrane drum and a pair of small finger cymbals. On the right, we observe an illumination of David entering Jerusalem when he is greeted by a female dancer playing finger cymbals or castanets. Contrary to the religious music of the Eastern Orthodox Church, little is known about the secular music in Byzantium. Many historical treatises have been preserved to this day, among which the Book of Ceremonies by Constantine Porphyrogenitos and the Treatise on Offices by Pseudokodinos are still regarded as the most complete, descriptive, and analytical sources of information related to the way imperial ceremonies were executed, inside and outside the palace. However, neither one speaks of the music itself, although they do mention occasionally the music scale that was used in certain acclamations. No written remarks are mentioned inside these texts in reference to the music composition itself, how long it lasted, in what way the musicians and the chanters sang together, or how the music actually sounded. Unfortunately, as mentioned earlier, this type of music did not manage to survive, mainly because it was not associated with the ecclesiastical practice. What is known is that the Byzantines used in many occasions the same musical instruments similar to those that we encounter in late antiquity depictions. They also evolved some musical instruments, like the pipe organ, that originally derived from a hydraulis of the 3rd century BC. In general, music played an important part in the daily life of the Byzantines, both of imperial and rural class. At the hippodrome, the acclamations to the emperor included the pipe organ. In the case of weddings, membrane drums and stringed instruments expressed the joy and happiness. The attendants of religious celebrations and symposium not only sang, but also danced to demonstrate their cheerfulness. Closing, one can only hope that some fruitful evidence of how this type of music was composed or sounded will be found in the future. Before finishing tonight's chamber talk, I would like to present you with a small video based on the chronography of John Skylitzis, dated in the 12th century. The illumination, which is taken from the folio 10 verso, depicts two figures raised on a large shield borne by 6 more people dressed in short tunics. The figure on the left represents an emperor with crown and laurels, crowned by a taller man on the right. According to the suggestions of André Grabar and Manoussos Manousakas, the illustration depicts the coronation of Leo V the Armenian as co-emperor by the Mikhail I Rangave. This small duration video will be embodied in an audio-visual that Gabam prepares at the moment. Accordingly, I would like to mention the names of the people involved in that project. These are Merve Uskilic, with whom we worked on the screenplay, Ali Çiftçi, who did the animation, and Onur Gürkan, who was the animation supervisor. I hope you enjoy. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your lecture, Antonios. And I am seeing the live chat for any questions. If anyone wants to ask anything, we are in 19 viewers actually at the moment. A lot of thank you messages are coming through.
Thank you.
Chat. So I would like to invite Emir Alışık, the organizer of this event tonight. Maybe he has a question in his mind.
Well, hello again. Thank you, Antonios, for this really informative and detailed talk. it is going very well, keeping in mind the exhibition as well. So I suggest everyone to check the exhibition as well. So your talk, I mean, you have a lot of really nice visuals, but your talk will be much more founded with the exhibition, I think. So if we are having questions, maybe I can again give the floor to Merve and Antonios.
Thank you, Emir. Now we have two questions coming from the chat. One of them from Zeynep Olgun. Dear Antonios, thank you very much for your presentation. How loud the organ would be? Is this related to its size? For example, how loud would the organ during be at the games of the Hippodrome? And the second question from Zeynep again. Any sources that mention listening or playing music for individual aesthetic pleasures, or anyone playing musical instruments who wouldn't be classified as a musician? Just for leisure.
Thank you for both questions. The pipe organ, the sound that it created, how loud would be heard, possibly has to do with its size. We have small depictions of it, like in the obelisk of Theodosius, where the pipe organ appears smaller in size. We have illuminations that the pipe organ appear bigger in other occasions. I guess that the size of the organ would vary according to the place where it was supposed to be performed. In the Hippodrome, we can't actually say the size of it, but I'm sure that because the Hippodrome is a very big place, most probably it features all three bellows and many pipes so as to sound louder. Can we please repeat the second question?
Any sources that mention listening or playing music for individual aesthetic pleasure, or anyone playing musical instruments who wouldn't be classified as a musician, like for some leisure activity?
I guess that just following the examples of late antiquity. Here in Byzantium too, we should have musicians, professionals, who would study music and perform in music competitions, playing the lyre, the avlos, the kithara, following the examples of late antiquity. But of course, we should have common people who just learned music and performed it for their own entertainment. The illuminations that we have at hand depict both cases. We can see professional musicians, just like we showed earlier in the wedding scene of Alexander the Great and Roxanne. And we have depiction of shepherds. While attending their flocks, we can see them standing on top of the mountains playing the flute. That means that the musical instruments were both performed by professionals and from everyday citizens.
So there are no other questions, so I will fill this gap with a question of my own.
Yes, please.
Do we know any instrument that's specific to a specific strata of the society?
Sorry, something to do with the signal. Could you repeat?
Okay. Do we know if any instrument is specific to any class of people in the society? For example, is aulos common?
You're right. Some instruments are depicted played by everyday life citizens, like the avalos, which is not expensive to produce. It can be played easily. We have people from the upper class playing stringed instruments, not the lyre, but the kithara, which is a more elaborate construction of the lyre. We can see other instruments like the psaltery. The psaltery is also a difficult musical instrument to perform that we often see in the hands of King David. The pipe organ would require specific musicians trained to play it rather than the everyday life user. So yes, according to the class, we can perhaps extend our thoughts to the soldiers, meaning playing the horns and the trumpets, to sound movement, sound attack or retreat. We've seen earlier in the naval scene that 4 trumpeters are standing on 2 boats, perhaps giving orders for the soldiers to attack or retreat. So yes, according each class, each social class featured instrument of its own. Although there are depictions where we can see some more primitive organs, like the flute, being played by the upper class.
Thank you. So we have another question through chat. Yorgos Karaseris, if I'm pronouncing correct. Since church music was performed even in a small scale in the Imperial Palace, do you think there might be even a small relation between the secular and religious music?
Sorry, again, something with the signal. Would you repeat that question?
Okay. In the Imperial Palace, do you think there might be even a small relation between the secular music and the ecclesiastical music?
Mm-hmm. First of all, we mentioned that some of the acclamations were performed in certain scales. The author says, for instance, Plagal Mode 4th. For those who knows this Byzantine music, knows that Plagal Mode 4th resembles to the Rast, as we could say in the Turkish music, the makam. I'm sure that the musical instruments that perform this kind of songs, hymns, should have some connection to the religious services, not in the practice, not inside the church, but they would repeat these same patterns. The songs would be not identical, but they should have some relations to the hymns sounded inside the church. Unfortunately, the music was not preserved. We know the Byzantine psalms, we know the Byzantine notations in manuscripts, but this kind of music, the secular music, we don't have any information on how it sounded. But I guess that, yes, it should have the basis of the ecclesiastical music as well.
Thank you for your reply. I see no other questions in the chat. And I cannot think of any questions, so if Emir wants to do a closing speech.
Okay, since we don't have any more questions, while I was saying that, I think there is one more question. Maybe we can take that and then we can close the night.
Okay, in one of the slides, there was a man playing an instrument that looked very much like what we call ney, which is mainly used currently by Sufis, mainly the Mevlevi.
Yes, sorry to interrupt. If I recall, this was the nativity scene, the second slide on the right part, when we have a description of a shepherd playing an obelisk. Yes, please continue. Yes.
No, is there any relation between ney or one of the Byzantine instruments that we know of?
If I may, I would like to go back to the second slide I was to discuss. There it is. This is taken from a church, this fresco, it comes from a church in Crete, dated to the 14th century. The way he is playing that musical instrument, yes, I agree, could be related to the ney, to the kaval, to the open-ended flute from both sides. Many instruments are played that way. The Mediterranean, the Mediterranean features musical instruments in most civilizations. It's really difficult to pinpoint exactly if this instrument derives from Persia, from Turkey, if it is Greek. It's so difficult. So yes, perhaps this way of playing resembles to the ney. However, due to the way it is played, and since it is a wooden instrument, the avlos in general would characterize this instrument. I agree, however, with the questions, yes, that the size of it resembles to ney. However, some may say that this is a kaval, which is bigger in size, and it's placed accordingly that way too.
Okay, two other questions.
Mm-hmm.
One, we'll start with it. Do we know why the instrumental music has disappeared from the church?
The church fathers were against the use of musical instruments in the religious service. Many ecumenical councils had declared that, had mentioned that, and I guess that contrary to the late antiquity customs, Christianity didn't want to embody these musical instruments in the religious service. I don't know if that answers the question. Yes, but the musical instruments did not survive to the religious chant, the religious service music.
Could we suppose that Greek folk music is related to Byzantine secular music?
There are manuscripts that preserve songs. There are Greek manuscripts that preserve songs. The first of which, if I recall correctly, is dated to the 14th, 15th century. My personal opinion is that it scales the way the musicians performed, the instruments they used, managed somehow to evolve and maintain their use in everyday life through oral tradition. Yes, I believe that perhaps some aspects of secular music, not completely referring to the secular one, inside the palace, I mean the coronations and declamations, perhaps yes, some songs could have survived through oral tradition.
Thank you. Another question. Did the chanters of Saint Sophia have any relationship with the Imperial Palace's musical performance? As far as I know, the proto-saltist of Saint Sophia was also responsible for a small choir in the Imperial Palace.
Yes, the chanters of Hagia Sophia and the proto-saltist was indeed in charge of a small choir. However, we see them at imperial banquets, we see them in many occasions where they are participating in festive occasions like the one described earlier. After the 17th, 18th century, we can see chanters of churches composing secular music songs. So, yes, I think that the chanters of that time they were not only in the church, but also could have composed other music or participate in other occasions.
Thank you. So I think this concludes the Q&A session of tonight.
Okay, thank you again for the nice questions and good answers as well. And I just want to remind you that you can see the exhibition, if I'm not wrong, through Suna Karac Libraries digital collections of Koç University, right? So thank you for joining us tonight. So I wish you a good evening and thank you for participating, Merve and Antonio.
Thank you for the invitation.